Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today we are going to be doing a book haul. This book haul is predominantly from the last couple of weeks into July, and potentially there might be a book or two that creeps in towards the end of June. I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. The months and the weeks just blur together these days, so I have no idea. I actually filmed this video earlier on today and something went wrong with my recording. I don't know what happened, and let's just say I'm annoyed. So I'm now doing this video for a second time, and originally I had all the books out and I was showing the books, and you know what, this is the second time now and I can't be bothered. It's been a long day. So what I will do is I will just insert images of the books that I purchased or that I received, and we'll take it from there. So anyway, let's jump right in. So I'm going to start off with the non-fantasy books. I unsurprisingly purchased a lot of fantasy, so you know, most of this list is fantasy books, but let's start with the non-fantasy. So the first book I purchased was the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. I got a modern retelling of it. It's not really a modern retelling, it's just more, it's not as Old English as the Old English version is. It's a slightly modernized version. I've heard pretty good things about it. I know it's sacrilege to not read the original version, but I read generally very late in the evening, and by that time my brain is just not operating at its full capacity. So I bought a slightly modernized version, which apparently is still quite true to the original story. So I'm planning to read that maybe towards the end of this year. I'm not entirely sure, but I would like to read it this year because I have very fond memories of the Canterbury Tales. I remember my mum reading the stories to my brothers and I when we were growing up, but I genuinely don't remember much about them. So my target is this year. The next book I purchased was an Agatha Christie novel. I have never read any Agatha Christie, which my mother chastised me about the other day. She loves Agatha Christie, she loves a good detective novel, she loves Poirot as an example, but I've never read any, and she was laughing at me the fact that I haven't read any Agatha Christie. So I went ahead and I purchased this one, An Unexpected Guest. It's a very, very short story. It's not one of her kind of full-blown crime epics, if you want to call it that, but it's a short one. I think it's about 160 pages, so I can read it very easily in one sitting and get a taste for it. If I like that one, then I will definitely purchase more. So this one, I think I might try and read next month. Like I said, I can probably read it in a couple of hours, so that's my plan. The next book I got was a book that I've been wanting to read for a very long time, and that is Shantaram. Shantaram is about a young, I believe he's a young man. He goes backpacking in Kashmir, and I'm just very curious. I'm very curious about I love like backpacking stories. I love it when like a person who is not native to that country, or a person who is not from that country, goes to a foreign country and explores and goes on adventures and meets people and gets a taste of a different culture. I love those types of stories. So Shantaram has been on my radar for a while now. I just haven't, you know, I purchased it last month because I saw it in the store and I was like, okay, I gotta read this year. So Shantaram is definitely on my list. I know there's also, I believe there's an HBO movie or an Apple movie being made. I mean, Apple ruined most things, so I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but I'm excited to read it. I'm excited to jump into a world that is somewhat familiar to me. The next book I got was Cain and Abel by Jeffrey Archer. Cain and Abel is one of my mum's favorite books. I believe it's actually out of print. Interestingly enough, I went to my local bookstore and I asked them to order it in for me because I hate buying books from Amazon now. And they said it was out of print, so I ended up buying it from Amazon anyway. First time in a while, mind you, but I purchased it and I'm planning to read it next month. It sounds like a book right up my street. It's about two people from two very different backgrounds who end up in a very similar situation, and it's about their story, about how they got there, and then once they got there, what their interactions were like with each other. So it's a story about real people living very real lives, and I love those stories. I love books where it could feel like you are in that situation yourself, and I've only heard great things about Jeffrey Archer, not only from my mother, but from other people too. And I'm very excited to read that next month. I also want to read that just to take a little bit of a break from fantasy, because I've read a lot of fantasy recently and I want to change it up a little bit. So that's on my list for this year. And the next book was gifted to me by Kate, whose Bookstagram I will link below, and her YouTube channel. And it's a book that I've never read. I honestly had never really heard of this author until very recently, and that is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. From what I understand, it's a quartet, and it essentially follows these two best friends and them living their lives from being quite young to, I think, quite old. This is Angela's I think it's one of her favorite books. I know she loves it, and Angela's opinion I totally listen to. And it's a story that, you know, I love stories about friendships. I love stories about people who kind of have a portion of their life together, then they kind of separate and then they come back together. I love those sorts of stories. They feel very real and they feel very raw. So that one, I don't know if I'm going to get to it this year, but it's I mean, since she mentioned it to me, it's been on my radar, and then lovely Kate got it for me. So I'll hopefully get to that maybe early next year. And then last but not least, the last 3 books that I purchased are actually a trilogy, and that is the Wolf Hall trilogy by Hilary Mantel. I've never read any Hilary Mantel. I've never read Wolf Hall. I've never watched the show. I've heard about the show. I've heard about the book. I've heard about her writing. I know Klaus loves her writing, and I'm curious. Call me curious. I do love a good historical fiction. It's not, I generally prefer like historical fantasy fiction, but I love a good historical fiction as much as the next person. So this one I'm going to try and get to this year. I don't know if that's going to be possible though. I'm going to try, but we'll see. But it's, I think I bought all 3 books, but I think the 3rd book came out recently. So it's the end of the trilogy now. And I thought, okay, now that they're all 3 out, I can kind of basically read them back to back. So that's my plan. We'll see if it actually happens this year, but I'm excited nevertheless. The next books I bought were books that are, I mean, these are all fantasy from now on. They were books that are either, they're not really, some are standalones, some are first in a series, and then one of them is a final book in a series. So it's a little bit of a mishmash. The first book I got is a book that I'm very anxious about. His fandom seems a little bit insane. They're very, very passionate about his world and what he's built. Guess which one I'm talking about. It's Stephen Erickson's Book of the Fallen. I believe it's the first book in the Malazan series, which is this like epic world that he's built. I know it's meant to be kind of for more advanced fantasy readers, which I would probably consider myself by now. I've read a lot of fantasy, and I'm curious. A lot of my friends are definitely on this kind of spectrum of whether they love him or they really don't like his writing. Very rarely have I met somebody in the middle. It's either one or the other. So I'm curious to see where I sit on that spectrum. I have a feeling I'll like it, because I think it's quite dark and it's very like world building focused, which is not normally what I like, but if it's in a dark setting, I feel like I might like it, because I like really dark, gritty books, which from my understanding, these books are. So I'm going to try and read the first book this year. Again, I don't know if it's going to be possible. I have a feeling if I read the first one, I'll want to jump into the second one pretty quickly. It's generally how I read my series, but who knows? It is on my roster for this year, but let's play it by ear. The next book is another book that I'm actually quite anxious to read, and that is Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This is the first book in the Dresden Files, and I love a good like fantasy detective. I think it's something a little bit fresh, it's something a little bit new. It's not something that I necessarily read all the time. So this is one that I don't think I'm going to get to this year. I was going to try and read it in like November, but I've just got like too many other books that I need to read, and I've got a couple of buddy reads, and it's just getting to a point where if I say I'm going to read it, I'm lying. So I don't want to lie to you guys. I don't want to lie to myself either. So probably one for next year, but I'm excited to jump into it. I have a feeling that I'm really going to like it. I've also heard that it gets a lot more serious. It gets a lot more grittier as the series goes on. And apparently the character of Harry Dresden he's pretty awesome. So let's see. The next book is a first book in a series, or duology, and that is Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. Don't know anything about this book. All I know is that there are friends of mine that like it. I saw it in the bookstore and I purchased it. It's really as simple as that. I love a good duology. Sometimes I don't like to, you know, start a trilogy or a quartet or anything longer than that, and a duology is a lot more palatable. One of my friends who I used to work with actually recently reached out to me and told me that he read this book and he thought of me, and I was like, okay, I trust your opinion on books and video games, so I will trust your opinion on this book. So that's why I purchased it predominantly. So again, not going to get to it this year, but it's going to be one that I will probably get to maybe at the end of this year. Who knows? Next is a book that has been on my radar for a while. This author, I should say, has been on my radar for a while. And he seems to be quoted by a lot of my favorite authors as an influence, and that is David Gemmell. The book is Legend, and it's really nice and short. It's just over 300 pages, so I'd be able to probably read this in like 1 or 2 sittings. And apparently it's just like epic fantasy, but very palatable, not too intense, good palate cleanser. Sometimes that's what you need. So I purchased that recently, and I actually think I'm going to try and read that one this year. And if I like it, then I'll probably pick the other 2 up and read them back to back, because I love reading like series back to back if I can. It's definitely on my TBR for the rest of this year. The next one was also gifted to me by my lovely friend Charmaine, whose Bookstagram I will link down below. She purchased me We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. This is a book that I've been wanting to get for a while, and I don't know how she knew that I really wanted it, but Charmaine, great job. And I think I'm gonna try and read that this year. Again, it really depends on kind of my mood, because I'm very much a mood reader, but you know, right now I'm reading the David Bad trilogy. I'm on the 2nd book in the David Bad trilogy, and I'm loving the kind of Middle Eastern, Asian, basically non-Western fantasy. And I read a lot of medieval, Renaissance inspired fantasy, which I love. There's a reason why I read it. I love it. But it's so nice to be in a world that feels, it's so nice to be in worlds that feel familiar to me, and that, you know, there's terminology that I know, and there's characters that look like me, or they're described as looking like me. It's really, really nice and refreshing. So We Hunt the Flame, definitely one for this year. And if I like it, I'll get the second one pretty much straight up. And then this next one is a controversial one. Angela, dear Angela, I think she knows what's coming. She detests this book with a passion. And that is the first book in the Powder Mage trilogy, Promise of Blood. I love the sound of this book. I know a lot of people loved the sound of this book, and then they read it and they were like, this is shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear. This is not very good. And the plot sounds interesting. I know it's like flintlock fantasy, so you know, there's a little bit of kind of modern, you know, there's like guns in it and stuff like that, which I love. I love that kind of mixture of like magic and guns and all these different elements. And I'm in this Slowly Read server, which I'll also link down below. And some of the guys in there said, it's amazing, you have to read it. And Angela on the other side is telling me, Zara, I hate it. So I'm really, again, it's one of those instances where I'm just really, really curious to see where I'm going to sit on that spectrum of love and hate, because I think Alan also didn't really like it, whose opinion I also respect and who I will also link down below. And I'm just, yeah, I'm curious. When I have like, when I hear of books that are incredibly polarizing, I have to read them, because I want to see where I sit on the spectrum. So that one, I think we're planning to buddy read it in September. I think it's September or maybe October. I'm excited. I'm so curious to see if I'll like it. And then the last book is We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. This was bought for me by my friend Sharon, whose YouTube channel I will link down below. Wonderful person, wonderful human being. And this is a book that's been on my radar after I watched an author interview with Mike Shackle. He seems like a really lovely guy. I found it really interesting that he lived in Japan, I believe it was. He lived in Japan for a while, and that kind of helped inspire him to write this series. I don't know what the name of the series is called, but to write the first book. And I believe the 3rd book is now coming out at some point this year, or maybe next year. But either way, it's being released like relatively soon. I love the cover of this book. I love the sound of this book. It just sounds like it's going to be, you know, full of like action, political intrigue, all of these different aspects that I love. So I'm really curious to jump into this one. I'm actually going to try and read that one this year, but again, who knows? I mean, I want to time it with the third book because, like I said, I like to read kind of trilogies back to back, series back to back. So I need to double check when it's coming out. If anybody knows, please let me know down below. I purchased 2 full sets of series, fantasy series. The first one is War for the Rose Throne by Peter McLean. I watched the interview that the Brothers Gwyn did with Peter McLean, whose channel I will also link down below. And he seems like such a lovely person, such a lovely guy. I'd love to just like take him out for lunch and just talk to him about stuff. He just like seems like one of those people that you could just very easily like go grab a coffee with him and just like have a good chat. Anyway, I love supporting authors who are nice people or seem like nice people. And also the plot sounds fascinating. It's described as kind of Peaky Blinders in a fantasy setting. Peaky Blinders is one of my favorite shows. I absolutely adore it. And, you know, for me, it's a given. I'm actually going to read this. I think this might potentially be my next series that I read. It's between this and one other series, which I'll come on to in a second. But either way, I'm psyched. Also, the books aren't that long. I think the last book is the longest, and it's only about 340 pages, which, you know, for me, I can read that pretty quickly, even with my hectic work schedule. So definitely on my radar for this year. And now we're coming down to the final stretch. The next book I purchased was The Forgetting Moon. The Forgetting Moon was recommended to me by a couple of people, kind of weirdly at the same time. I've known about Brian Lee Durfee for a while. I don't know if I pronounced his last name accurately. Apologies, Brian, if I didn't. I'll link his channel down below because I've been following his channel for like maybe just over a year now. And I didn't actually realize he was an author until I watched a review of somebody reviewing it and he commented in it, and I was like, oh, I didn't connect the dots here. So anyway, Brian Lee Durfee, Forgetting Moon. I just heard it's a good time. It's very reminiscent of Malice, apparently. Lots of characters, lots of action, lots going on. I mean, what more could you want? I loved Malice. It was one of my favorite ones out of the quartet of Faithful and the Fallen. And so for me, it's, you know, if you're going to sell it to me as a Malice kind of has a Malice type vibe, I'm going to go for it. The next 2 are by the same author. If you watch my last video, this won't be a surprise. I purchased Snakewood and Brother Red by Adrian Selby. I loved The Winter Road. Absolutely incredible book. Amazing writing, amazing characters, fantastic plot, and just all round great author. I also watched an interview with him and he seems like such a great guy. And, you know, I went pretty much as soon as I finished that book, I ordered the other 2 that he's written, and Angela and I are planning to read one of them. We're not sure which one yet, at the end of this month. So I think we're probably going to read Brother Red, but we'll see. But either way, I can't wait to jump back into his writing and into his world because it's top notch. The next book was a third book in a series that I purchased. So I mentioned earlier that I'm reading the David Bad trilogy. I finished book 1 last week. I started book 2 a couple of days ago. I'm probably going to finish book 2 this weekend. So I went out and purchased the third book, which is The Empire of Gold. That's the third and final book in the trilogy. I'm halfway through. I'm just over halfway through the second book, and it's just madness. Like, it's so good. Book 2 is already a 5-star for me, and I haven't even finished it. So it's generally a good sign. She'll have to really mess it up for me not to like it. And I just don't. I have faith in her. I have faith in S.A. Chakraborty. Very excited to read that. And then I'll be done with the series definitely before the end of this month. And then the next book I got was also another gift from Sharon again. She's very generous. And that is The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. I've heard pretty good things about this book. I've just heard that it's a good time. It's not too intense. It's a good kind of a good palate cleanser. So I'm actually planning to read that one this year because I've generally heard really positive things. So I'm just kind of curious to kind of see whether I'll like it. The next book is The Hand of the Sun King by J.T. Greathouse. Again, it's another Asian inspired fantasy. I'm trying to read more non-Western, non-European focused fantasy. I'm trying to branch out a little bit more, as you can probably tell. And Asian inspired fantasy in particular, especially kind of the Far East, is a geography that I'm generally very interested in. It's a history that I don't know as much of compared to other parts of the world. So I'm kind of hoping that by reading some kind of more fantasy about it, it'll reveal to me certain periods of history that I might find interesting. It's also like the Poppy War is another series that I'd really like to read that I haven't got around to yet, but I've heard really great things about that as well. So going back to this book, this is a debut novel. I also like supporting new authors. So, you know, I purchased it pretty quickly as soon as I heard about it, and the plot sounds really interesting. So again, I'm not sure if this is going to be one that I get to necessarily this year, but it's on my list. It's on my list. All right, we're down to 2. So the penultimate book I purchased recently was The Gauntlet and the Fist Beneath. This is part of my monthly subscription with Goldsborough. Goldsborough have a science fiction and fantasy monthly subscription. You pay a fixed fee, and then every month they send you a new release, a new book. That is a first edition, it's signed, it's numbered. They're really, really pretty and they're really beautiful, and they feel very, very special. And I've actually never heard of this book before, no idea what it's about. I love the cover. The cover is really cool, and the naked hardback is really, really pretty, but I genuinely don't know anything about it. So this is another one that I think I might try and pick it up this year, because I'm kind of curious to just jump into a book that I know nothing about and just see kind of what happens. Normally I like research my books and I see reviews and all of this stuff, but I'm kind of tempted to just jump into it and like with no expectation whatsoever and see what happens. But yeah, that's on my potentially my radar for this year. And then the final book, technically it's 4 books, but I bought the omnibus edition, and that is the Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. This book is loved by many people whose opinions I respect and listen to. Katrina, Angela, Alan, there's a couple of others as well that my mind has just gone completely blank and I can't remember. Apologies. I also think Klaus really likes LPQ, but I've heard so many great things about the characters, about the plot, I think there's a lot of political intrigue, but there's also some military fantasy, if I remember correctly. It sounds like a book right up my street. I think earlier on I mentioned that War for the Rose Throne might be my next series. This is, and then I mentioned that there might be actually another series that I might read, and this is the other series. So it's between these two, War for the Rose Throne and Long Price Quartet. If I don't read, you know, one of them now, it will be read later on this year. But I feel like it's probably going to be LPQ, because just so many people love it. So many people whose opinions I rate and I respect love it. So I think LPQ is going to be the next one. But it's really interesting. I have been trying to find the omnibus edition for so long in the UK, and it's so hard to find. It's not on Book Depository. It's very hard to buy it brand new, so I had to buy a second edition, which I don't mind, but even finding a second-hand edition was hard. And finally they got one in stock in Amazon, and then I purchased it. That's one that I'm definitely going to read this year. It's just a matter of when and where I kind of slot it in. So anyway, that's my haul for the past couple of weeks. I feel like this video has gone on for ages, but the reason why I think that is because this is the second time that I'm doing it, and knowing my luck, I probably missed something out. Alas, it is what it is. C'est la vie. So I'm gonna end it here now, guys, but let me know down in the comments below if you've purchased any of these books, if you've read any of them, if you're curious about any of them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the conversation down there. In the meantime, as always, be safe, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.